here's the deal, right? When I was first starting out on guitar, I made the mistake of thinking, I need a humbucker because I play metal. And unfortunately, the first act Stratocaster that I had gotten for either my birthday or Christmas when I was 7 years old was all single coils, and I thought it needed to be replaced. Fortunately, I was lucky enough, someone was willing to give me a humbucker guitar they didn't need anymore for free. But because that's not going to happen for everybody, I'm going to show you what I wish I knew. This patch... So first of all, this is a cheap multi-effects pedal. These are like a couple $100 as opposed to the couple thousand people usually spend on this kind of thing. This will do the job. Like, the effects in here aren't necessarily faithful recreations of what they say they are, but that's not what's important. What's important is that it does what it says on the tin. Naming it after a certain thing is just to tell you the vibe they were going for. And usually that's good enough to get the vibe you're going for. So as you can see, this patch is called Mortal Coil. That's an intentional pun. And it sounds like this. And in my own opinion, that's pretty convincing, right? We are currently playing a telecaster, which I can't get properly on screen right now. But the reason we're starting with this guitar is because it has a mod on it, which you can do on any guitar with at least 2 pickups. And we haven't even used the mod yet, but the idea is you can throw your pickups into series. Notice the noise went away. And it will become more humbucker-like as a result of doing that. Now, for all our examples for this process, that's a very cheap mod to do, but I'm going to assume not everyone's willing to do it, so for the sake of the process, I'm going to just use the bridge pickup, which, as you saw when I started out, is pretty much good enough aside from the noise problem. Which, to account for that, first of all, it's so much worse without the gate. Second of all, you can just rotate the guitar. I just have to stand in the noisy direction in order to be facing the camera and the microphone, unfortunately. That's something to be aware of on all guitars, is like, you gotta rotate yourself into whatever position is the least noisy. Now, we're gonna turn all these effects off except for the gate, so we can go over what they all do. We're actually going to start by talking about the gate. This ZNR is a proprietary zoom thing, but it's actually kind of genius because it obfuscates away an otherwise kind of obtuse concept, which is sidechain gating. Basically, this gate, if you set it to guitar in, is triggered off the direct signal right here, as opposed to what anything else in the chain is doing. So you're triggering the gate purely based on the actual guitar, but the gate itself is after all of the effects, so it's going to be clamping down on the noise from the amp, from all your pedals, and whatever the fuck else is in there, without sacrificing how well the gate is working, because usually if you put a gate after compression or distortion, it just makes it not work anymore, because everything is as loud as everything else. This doesn't have that problem. That said, single coils are so noisy that it still struggles. You could crank up the threshold, but that's going to start eating into your sustain once you get above like 60 or so. Moving on to this EQ, which is at the start of the chain. Traditionally, you put an EQ at the end because that's where it will have the most effect. But instead, what we're doing is putting it at the start because we're trying to essentially emulate the sound of an active humbucker. And to that end... Oh, that's funny, I accidentally had too much in there, but it was still fine. But to that end... And I like to start from the top down when I'm using EQs. So first of all, we're going to max out the volume to emulate the effect that humbuckers are a little hotter than single coils. And then we're going to dump out all of the highs. In this case, that's to 12K. Because the difference between single coils and humbuckers is how many high frequencies it's letting through, essentially. It's kind of similar to your tone knob. You could also achieve this with your tone knob. You'd have to be careful not to turn it down too low that you're just losing all your attack. So I'd like to just have it be an EQ setting if I can help it. But as soon as we're not f***ing with the highest highs anymore, what we're doing instead is boosting the mids, especially the very middle of the mids, by a pretty decent amount. I mean, this EQ is still pretty subtle in the scheme of things. You could go more aggressive with it. And the surrounding frequency is just a little bit less. So 800 and 3.2 are a 4.5 dB boost, 6.4 and 400 at 1.5. If you want to emulate the sound of a passive humbucker, you can just crank the 6.4. because the passive humbucker has a lower resonant peak as a result of not letting as many highs through. Essentially, the cutoff filter is happening sooner, and so you can try to emulate that behavior by using this. But here's what it sounds like on my setting. First, I'll play the guitar with nothing. I should note the strings on this guitar are pretty dead right now, which actually helps us because it just takes the highs away even more. And what's annoying with single coils and distortion is you get a lot of like quacky, sparkly stuff that you actually really don't want. So if you just have dead strings, and I'm not saying it's part of the mojo or anything, like you have to have dead strings. I'm just saying it's actually not an issue because that takes a lot of sparkle out right out the gate. So here it is with it off. And then in. It's kind of subtle. Maybe if I play a brighter chord. Basically, EQ is literally just making it more humbucker-like. And here it is, adding in the fake peak at 6.2. And that actually, of course, makes it brighter, but it's the kind of bright that a humbucker would have if you had bright humbuckers. But for now, we're just going to leave that at the setting it was at. Next in the chain is this Tube Screamer emulation. I don't really care that it's a Tube Screamer, I just care that it's a boost. We're using the normal boost settings. There's just no gain, boost on, tone, yes, volume, yes. It already sounds crunchy, but single coils could already do crunch, so let's get distortion. Before we go over the amp settings, I'll just show you what it sounds like without all this pre-shaping going on. So like, it still works, but it's just a little flubby, right? Amp settings. This is a emulation of a rectifier. I'm not saying that it sounds like a rectifier, but the fact that it's the idea helps us because this is an amp that does not struggle for low end, and single coils do struggle for low end, so we're overcompensating. We are turning the bass all the way up, which is not something you would normally have to do on a recto. Mids, kind of high. I mean, they're barely above middles. It's mids, middle, treble, pretty high. Not a lot of volume just because it was too loud in my head. But also, and I don't know if this pedal models power amp distortion or not, but like, you don't want power amp distortion for metal tones, so I didn't want to crank it anyway. Gain is only at 65, so we actually could have gone higher. There's a good amount of presence. And so I'll turn my microphone off just so you can hear what the final tone sounds like without a bunch of shit going on. So basically that's all there is to it for the first method. As a bonus tip, you can also make your riffs sound more down-tuned than they are by playing a perfect fourth instead of a perfect fifth in the power chord, which is versus. It's like the normal power chord almost sounds happy by comparison, right? Like, yeah, the fourth one gets a little muddy, but it's just more brutal. And you'll actually see me using that technique in a lot of the examples that are coming later. Now, method 2. I wonder if you can already hear what it is. That's right, you can literally just use fuzz. This is a fuzz into a pretty clean amp. And that bright switch is pretty useful if you just want to clean it up a lot. It almost sounds like it has a boost. And just because this amp sim has that feature, I had the boost in this chain, but it's actually not turned on because I don't need it. The fuzz pedal is just dimed because we need a lot of gain for what we're trying to do. Now, the reason this works is because the fuzz is just distortion, but more. And the problem with the single coil guitar is because they're a little bit quieter, you're starting with less gain to begin with, so you could essentially think of all your distortion effects as being like one tier lower than usual, so like fuzz becomes distortion, distortion becomes overdrive, unless you use boosts to fix the volume issue. But basically, the fuzz is the direct solution that'll use the least number of pedals on your board if you're trying to do this with physical pedals or something. And it's also just a really good sound for either stoner doom riffs, or melodic stuff. And that's all there is to this one. That's actually the simpler method, but it's probably not necessarily the sound that you're going for, which is why I saved it for last. This is the simple solution, but you are going to end up with a very hashy transistor distortion. Oh, and the other benefit of the fuzz is you can just get rid of all this sparkle. I'm leaving the tone all the way up just because I prefer that, but like, the point is you don't have to. There's like a huge range of... You can go all the way from B's to like muffled, I don't know. It's just like a pillowy cloud of distortion. Like, that's probably too dark for almost anyone, but you know, it's granular. You could go down to here. So once again, I'll just turn my mic off and play some stuff. And that's all I have to say about it, unless editing me feels the need to add something. Okay, so now we're here in the DAW view to point out something else that's important. If you think your tone isn't like thick enough or distorted enough, it might be because you're not yet aware of double tracking. And like producing is important in general. Like if you think you don't have enough low end, it might be because you're not tracking with bass, and if it's not thick enough, it might be because you're only tracking one layer of guitars. And so you'll notice there's two tracks of guitar in here, and that's important. And I'm actually going to demonstrate like the correct way-ish to do it, because what tends to happen when you tell people you should double track is they just copy and paste the tracks, and that doesn't do anything. You actually have to record two separate takes. So we're gonna do that real quick. Probably, let's use the Doom riff. Let's just feel out what the tempo for that is first. Two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, in all fairness, I think I was actually feeling it faster than that, but what did we end up with? Like 64? We could double that to 128 just to get more clicks. That makes it easier to track too. Now, you shouldn't practice like that. You should practice with sparse metronomes, but a dense metronome will actually help you record better. Anyway, let's record the first layer. Normally I'd be way more meticulous about my recording, but for the purposes of showing a concept, I'm just going to keep trucking on here rather than like try to get this absolutely perfect. We're just going to try to get it tight enough that you can hear the effect. And so I'm going to already pan this so that as I'm tracking, you'll start to hear what I mean. So I think I don't even need to play that back. You already heard it, right? But for even more of a bonus, I think I will go ahead and record the bass. So this is literally just playing bass through a DI. No effects on the bass at all. And you'll see how much weight it adds, even just being totally clean like this. The bass is pretty quiet, so this time we might actually have to play with the levels a little bit and play it back for you. So I hope that explains the concept pretty well. Fairly well.